When Ethan Hale hired Naomi Brooks as his driver, he thought he was just replacing an employee, but he was actually about to destroy an 8-month engagement and risk everything his wealthy family had built. This successful white millionaire had no idea that the quiet black woman behind the wheel would see straight through his perfect facade and force him to choose between a safe future with his powerful fiancée Victoria and a love so honest it terrified him. What started as professional small talk in morning traffic became the kind of connection that changes everything, the kind that makes a man question whether he's been living someone else's life. But when Victoria announces their engagement party to 300 guests and Naomi threatens to quit, Ethan faces an impossible choice that will either set him free or cost him everything he's worked for. The quiet moments between employer and driver were about to explode into a scandal that would rock his entire world. If you're watching this and want to see how far a man will go when he finally finds real love, hit subscribe and tell me what city you're watching from. Because this story proves that sometimes the biggest risk is the one most worth taking. The alarm clock screamed at 5:47 a.m., 3 minutes before Ethan had planned to wake up. He reached across the king-sized bed and slapped the snooze button harder than necessary. The empty space beside him felt cold, but that was normal. Victoria had her own place across town, and they rarely spent entire nights together anymore. Ethan sat up and rubbed his face. Another day, another series of meetings that would blur together like every other day this month. He grabbed his phone from the nightstand and scrolled through 17 missed messages from his assistant, Sarah. The first one made his stomach drop. James quit. Effective immediately. Sorry for the short notice. I've arranged a temporary driver for today. James had been driving him for 3 years, reliable, quiet, professional. Ethan never had to think about transportation, which was exactly how he liked it. Now he'd have to break in someone new, explain his schedule, his preferences, his need for silence during morning drives. He showered quickly and pulled on his usual uniform, dark suit, white shirt, simple tie. Nothing flashy, nothing that drew attention. At 28, Ethan had learned that wealth spoke loudest when it whispered. The coffee maker gurgled to life as he checked his phone again. Sarah had sent the new driver's information. Naomi Brooks, professional driving service, clean record, available immediately. At exactly 7:30 a.m., Ethan stepped outside his downtown apartment building. The morning air carried the smell of exhaust and fresh bread from the bakery down the street. He looked for the usual black sedan, but saw a woman standing beside a spotless silver car instead. She was tall, probably 5'8", with dark skin that seemed to glow in the morning sun. Her black hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a simple gray blazer over dark pants. Professional, but not trying too hard. When she saw him approaching, she stepped forward with a slight smile. "Mr. Hale? I'm Naomi Brooks." Her voice was warm but controlled. She extended her hand for a brief, firm handshake. Her eyes met his directly, no looking down, no fake enthusiasm. Just calm confidence. "Thank you for taking this on such short notice," Ethan said. "No problem at all. I have your schedule from Sarah. First stop is the Meridian building on 5th Street, correct?" "That's right." She opened the back door for him, but something about the gesture felt different from James's routine. Less formal, more natural. Like she was being polite because she wanted to be, not because someone told her to. Ethan settled into the backseat and pulled out his phone, expecting to spend the drive returning emails. But as Naomi pulled into traffic, he found himself glancing up at the rearview mirror. She drove smoothly, no sudden stops or aggressive lane changes. Her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, and she seemed completely at ease. "The music okay?" she asked, nodding toward the soft jazz playing through the speakers. "It's fine." She didn't try to fill the silence with small talk, which Ethan appreciated. James had always been chatty in the mornings, sharing weather updates and traffic reports Ethan never asked for. Naomi just drove. But something about the quiet felt different this time. Not empty or awkward, just peaceful. 20 minutes later, they pulled up to the Meridian building. Naomi got out and opened his door, but again, it felt natural rather than forced. "What time should I pick you up?" she asked. 11:30. We'll head to lunch at Brennan's. I'll be here." Ethan watched her walk back to the driver's side. She moved with purpose, no wasted motion. As she drove away, he realized he felt calmer than usual. The knot of tension that usually sat in his shoulders seemed looser. The morning meetings passed in their usual blur of profit reports and expansion plans. Ethan found himself checking the time more often than normal, though he couldn't figure out why. At 11:25, he gathered his things and headed downstairs. Naomi was already waiting, leaning against the car and reading something on her phone. When she saw him, she slipped the phone into her pocket and opened his door. "How was your morning?" she asked as they pulled away from the curb. "Fine, the usual." "Long meetings?" 3 hours of people saying the same things in different ways. She laughed, a genuine sound that made him glance up at the mirror again. "That sounds painful." "It pays the bills." "I'm sure it does more than that." There was no judgment in her voice, just a simple observation. Ethan found himself wanting to explain that money hadn't always been easy, that he'd worked 16-hour days for years to build his consulting firm from nothing. But something about her tone suggested she already understood that success came with its own kind of weight. They reached Brennan's, and Naomi pulled up to the valet stand. "I'll circle the block a few times and be back in an hour," she said. "You don't have to do that. James usually just waited here. Traffic gets heavy around lunch. It's easier if I keep moving." Ethan nodded and got out. As he walked toward the restaurant, he caught himself hoping she'd be there when he came back out, not because he was worried she wouldn't be. Her professionalism was obvious, but because he'd started looking forward to the drive back to his office. Lunch was with Victoria and 2 potential investors. Victoria arrived first, as always, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the windy day. She wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than most people made in a month. Beautiful, successful, and completely in control. "You look tired," she said, kissing his cheek. "Late night reviewing contracts." "Well, you need to start sleeping more. We can't have you looking exhausted at the Hartwell Gala next week." The investors arrived, and the conversation shifted to market trends and quarterly projections. Victoria asked intelligent questions and took notes on her phone. She was good at this, better than Ethan in many ways. She could read people quickly and knew exactly what they wanted to hear. But as she talked about expansion opportunities and risk management, Ethan found his mind drifting to the peaceful quiet of his morning drive. No pressure to perform or impress, just honest silence. When lunch ended, Ethan walked outside to find Naomi exactly where she'd said she'd be. She got out to open his door, but Victoria appeared beside them before he could get in. "And you are?" Victoria asked, extending her hand to Naomi. "Naomi Brooks. I'm Mr. Hale's driver." "Oh, what happened to James?" "He found another position," Ethan said quickly. Victoria studied Naomi for a moment, then smiled the polite smile she used with service staff. "Well, I'm Victoria Lang, Ethan's fiancée." "Nice to meet you," Naomi said simply. "I hope you'll take good care of him. He works too hard." "I'll make sure he gets where he needs to go." There was something in Naomi's tone, not rude, just matter of fact. She wasn't trying to charm Victoria or win her approval. She was just doing her job. Victoria kissed Ethan goodbye and walked toward her own car. As they pulled away, Ethan noticed Naomi glance in the rearview mirror. "She seems nice," Naomi said. "She is." "How long have you been engaged?" 8 months. "When's the wedding?" "We're still working on the details." Naomi nodded but didn't ask any more questions. The rest of the drive passed quietly, but Ethan could sense her pulling back slightly. The easy warmth from earlier was still there, but it felt more carefully controlled. When they reached his office building, Naomi opened his door as usual. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. 7:30? "I'll be here." As she drove away, Ethan stood on the sidewalk longer than necessary. The afternoon sun felt warm on his face, and the city noise seemed less harsh than usual. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about the next meeting or the next deadline. He was thinking about how Naomi had laughed when he mentioned his boring meetings, how she'd asked about his morning like she actually cared about the answer, how she'd shaken Victoria's hand with quiet dignity, not trying to impress or compete. That evening, Ethan had dinner with his father at their usual restaurant downtown. Henry Hale was 62 but looked younger, with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from decades of success in real estate development. He ordered for both of them without consulting the menu, just as he'd done since Ethan was a child. "Victoria called me today," his father said, cutting into his steak. "She's concerned about the wedding timeline. We're not in any rush. Son, you're 28 years old. Victoria's 30. You've been together for 2 years. What exactly are you waiting for?" Ethan pushed food around his plate. "We want to make sure we're making the right decision." "The right decision?" Henry laughed. "Victoria Lang is brilliant, beautiful, and comes from good family. She'll be an asset to your business and your reputation. What more do you need?" "Maybe I need to feel something more than professional admiration." "Feelings?" Henry set down his fork. "Ethan, I've been married to your mother for 35 years. You know what's kept us together? Respect, shared goals, and compatible lifestyles. This romantic nonsense is for teenagers." "Did you love Mom when you married her?" "I respected her. I trusted her. I knew she'd be a good mother and a good partner. Love developed over time through shared experiences and mutual support." Ethan nodded, but something felt hollow about his father's words. Maybe that worked for their generation, but it didn't feel right for him. He wanted to feel excited about seeing Victoria, not obligated. He wanted to miss her when she wasn't around, not feel relieved when dinner ended early. "Besides," Henry continued, "the Langs have connections we need for the Portland expansion. Victoria's father could open doors that would take us years to break down otherwise." "So this is about business?" "Everything's about business, son. The sooner you understand that, the happier you'll be." Ethan called for a cab to take him home, which surprised his father. Usually, he'd drive his own car to dinner, but he'd gotten used to being driven. As he sat in the back seat of the taxi, he found himself missing the peaceful quiet of Naomi's car. The next morning, she was waiting outside his building at exactly 7:30, wearing the same professional blazer, but in navy blue this time. She smiled. When she saw him, a quick, genuine expression that made something warm settle in his chest. "Good morning, Mr. Hale." "Good morning, and please just call me Ethan." "All right, Ethan it is." She opened his door, and he caught a hint of her perfume, something light and clean, like citrus and fresh laundry. As they pulled into traffic, he realized he felt more awake than he had in weeks. "Sleep well?" she asked. "Not particularly. You?" "Like a rock. I always do after a good day's work." "What makes a day good?" She considered the question seriously. "Feeling useful, making someone's life a little easier, getting home tired but satisfied." "That's a nice way to look at it. What about you? What makes a good day?" No one had asked him that question in years. His father measured days by profits and connections made. Victoria measured them by goals accomplished and networks expanded. But Naomi seemed genuinely curious about his answer. "I'm not sure anymore," he said honestly. "That's okay. Sometimes it takes a while to figure out." They drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Ethan found himself studying her face in the rearview mirror. She had strong features, high cheekbones, full lips, expressive eyebrows, but it was her eyes that caught his attention. They were deep brown and seemed to see everything without judging any of it. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure." "How did you get into driving?" "My dad was a mechanic. Taught me everything about cars when I was little. After college, I worked in an office for a while, but I felt trapped behind a desk all day. This way I'm moving around, meeting different people, seeing the city. It suits me." "What did you study in college?" "Business administration. My parents thought it would be practical." "But you didn't like it?" "It was fine. Just not me, you know? I like solving problems, but I also like being outside, being active. Sitting in meetings all day talking about quarterly projections made me want to scream." Ethan laughed, surprising himself. "I spend most of my time in meetings talking about quarterly projections." "And do you want to scream?" "More often than I'd like to admit." "So why do you do it?" The question was simple, but it hit him like a punch to the stomach. Why did he do it? Because his father expected him to. Because he was good at it. Because he'd invested so much time and energy building his company that he couldn't imagine stopping now. But none of those reasons had anything to do with what made him happy. "I'm not sure," he said finally. "That's honest." "Is it? Most people would give me some answer about success and responsibility. You're actually thinking about it." When they reached his office, Naomi opened his door as usual. But this time, she looked at him directly. "I hope you figure it out," she said. "Figure what out? What makes a good day for you?" As she drove away, Ethan stood on the sidewalk feeling like someone had just turned on a light in a room he'd forgotten was dark. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about his schedule or his meetings or his obligations. He was thinking about what would make him happy. And he was thinking about the woman who'd asked him a question no one else seemed interested in hearing him answer. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that surprised Ethan with how much he looked forward to it. Every morning at 7:30, Naomi would be waiting outside his building, and every evening she'd drive him home with the same quiet professionalism that had drawn him to her from the first day. But something was shifting beneath the surface of their routine. It started small. Naomi began keeping bottles of water in the car after she noticed him buying one every morning. She learned his coffee preferences and started suggesting new routes when construction made their usual path slow. She remembered details about his meetings and asked thoughtful follow-up questions. How did the Henderson presentation go, she'd ask, or did the Portland investors agree to the timeline? Ethan found himself looking forward to these conversations more than the meetings themselves. Naomi listened without trying to solve his problems or offer business advice. She just heard him. One rainy Thursday morning, they sat in traffic longer than usual. Ethan had been quiet since getting in the car, staring out the window at the gray sky. "Rough morning?" Naomi asked. "Victoria wants to move the engagement party up to next month." "That's exciting." Something in her voice made him look up at the rearview mirror. Her expression was carefully neutral, but he caught a flicker of something else. Disappointment? He couldn't be sure. "Is it?" he asked. "Isn't it?" "I don't know. Should I be excited about announcing my engagement to 300 people I barely know?" "That depends. Are you excited about the person you're marrying?" The question hung in the air between them. Ethan knew he should say yes, should talk about how wonderful Victoria was, how lucky he felt. But with Naomi, he'd gotten used to honesty. "I think I should be," he said quietly. "But you're not. I respect her. She's brilliant and successful and beautiful. We make sense together on paper. But I don't think about her when she's not around. I don't miss her voice or wonder what she's doing. When I see her name on my phone, my first thought isn't excitement, it's obligation." Naomi was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. "That sounds lonely." It was. Ethan realized that he'd been lonely for months, maybe years, even when he was surrounded by people. Even when he was lying next to Victoria in bed, he felt like he was playing a role rather than being himself. "What about you?" he asked. "Are you seeing anyone?" "Not right now." "Why not?" She smiled slightly. "Same reason you probably shouldn't be getting married. I haven't found someone who makes me want to be a better version of myself just by being around them." "Is that what love is supposed to feel like?" "I think so. My parents have been married for 32 years, and my dad still lights up when my mom walks into a room. They challenge each other, support each other, make each other laugh. Even when they fight, you can tell they choose each other every day." "That sounds nice." "It is. It's also rare." Traffic started moving again, and the conversation drifted to lighter topics. But Ethan couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. When was the last time he'd lit up when Victoria walked into a room? When had he last felt challenged or supported by her presence? The answer was uncomfortable. Never. That evening, Ethan had dinner with Victoria at her apartment. She had ordered from their usual restaurant and set the table with her good china. Everything looked perfect, as always. "I've been thinking about the guest list for the engagement party," she said, passing him the wine. "We should invite the Hendersons and the Murrays. Good connections for both of us." "How many people are we talking about?" "Around 300. Maybe 350 if we include the international clients." "Victoria, that's not a party. That's a networking event." "Exactly. We need to think strategically about these things, Ethan. An engagement party isn't just a celebration. It's an opportunity." "For what?" "To strengthen relationships, make new connections, show people we're a team worth investing in." Ethan set down his fork. "What if I just want to celebrate with people who actually care about us?" "That's sweet but naive. We have responsibilities now. People expect certain things from us. What if I don't care what people expect? Victoria studied his face with the same analytical expression she used in board meetings. Are you having second thoughts about the engagement? I'm having second thoughts about turning our personal lives into business opportunities. Ethan, be realistic. We're not college kids anymore. Everything we do reflects on our professional reputations. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be. The word easier stuck in his mind as they finished dinner. Victoria talked about venue options and catering menus, but Ethan found himself thinking about his morning conversation with Naomi, about what it meant to choose someone every day rather than just going through the motions. When he got home that night, he stood by his window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Naomi was probably settling in for the evening, maybe reading a book or talking to her sister on the phone. He realized he wanted to know more about her life outside their morning drives. What kind of books did she read? What made her laugh when she was alone? The thought surprised him with its intensity. The next morning, Naomi was waiting as usual, but something felt different. She was more professional, more distant. She opened his door with the same courtesy, but didn't meet his eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Hale. I thought we agreed on Ethan. Right? Ethan." As they drove, she didn't ask about his evening or comment on the traffic. She just drove efficiently and quietly. The easy warmth that had been building between them seemed to have vanished overnight. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Of course. Why?" "You seem different today." "I'm just focused on driving." But he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly. Something had shifted, and he had no idea what or why. The change persisted for the rest of the week. Naomi remained professional but distant, answering his questions with polite brevity and offering no conversations of her own. The peaceful quiet he'd grown to love felt cold and empty now. On Friday afternoon, as she drove him home from his last meeting, Ethan couldn't stand it anymore. "Naomi, did I do something to upset you?" "Not at all." "Then why won't you talk to me?" She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "I think it's better if we keep things professional." "Why?" "Because you're engaged, and I'm your employee, and some boundaries shouldn't be crossed." "What boundaries? We just talk." "Do we?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Ethan realized she was right. Somewhere over the past few weeks, their conversations had become the best part of his day. He looked forward to seeing her more than he looked forward to seeing his own fiancée. "I value our conversations," he said carefully. "So do I. That's the problem." She pulled up to his building and got out to open his door, but this time she wouldn't look at him. "Naomi." "Have a good weekend, Ethan." She drove away before he could say anything else. Ethan stood on the sidewalk feeling like he'd lost something important, though he couldn't name exactly what. That weekend, Victoria picked out engagement rings. They spent Saturday afternoon at 3 different jewelry stores while she examined settings and compared diamond cuts. She asked his opinion on everything, but somehow none of his answers seemed right. "This one's beautiful," she said, holding up a ring with a 2-carat diamond surrounded by smaller stones. "Classic, but distinctive." "It's very nice." "You don't sound enthusiastic." "I'm not good at jewelry shopping." "Well, you should be. This ring will represent our relationship for the rest of our lives." The rest of our lives. The phrase should have filled him with excitement, or at least contentment. Instead, it made him feel like he was looking down a long, empty hallway with no doors. They finally settled on the ring Victoria liked best, and she wore it out of the store, admiring it in the afternoon sunlight. "I can't wait to show my parents," she said. "They're going to be so excited." "Are you excited?" "Of course. This is what we've been working toward." Working toward, not dreaming about or longing for. Working toward, like a business goal or a quarterly target. That night, Ethan lay in bed staring at the ceiling. In less than 12 hours, he'd see Naomi again, but she'd probably maintain the same professional distance she'd held all week. The thought made his chest feel hollow. He'd been telling himself their conversations were harmless, just friendly exchanges with someone he saw every day. But Naomi was right. Somewhere along the way, the boundaries had gotten blurred, not physically, They'd never so much as shaken hands unnecessarily, but emotionally. The truth was, he cared about her, more than he cared about his own fiancée, and that scared him more than anything he'd ever felt. Monday morning came gray and drizzly. Ethan waited outside his building, checking his phone repeatedly until he saw the silver car turn the corner. Naomi got out to open his door, professional and distant as she'd been all week. "Good morning." "Morning?" She was wearing a black blazer today, and she'd changed her hair. Instead of the neat bun, she wore it in a low ponytail that made her look younger. He wanted to tell her it looked nice, but he sensed that would cross one of those boundaries she'd mentioned. The drive to his first meeting passed in silence. When they reached the downtown office building where he had his appointment, Naomi pulled up to the curb and got out to open his door. "I'll be back in 2 hours," she said. "Naomi." He turned to face her fully. "I miss talking to you." Her expression softened for just a moment, and he saw a flicker of the warmth that had drawn him to her in the first place, but then she caught herself and stepped back. "I miss it too," she said quietly. "But missing something doesn't make it right." She got back in the car and drove away, leaving Ethan standing on the sidewalk with the rain starting to fall. For the first time since he'd started his company, he didn't want to go into the meeting. He wanted to get back in the car and spend the morning talking to the one person who seemed to understand him. Instead, he straightened his tie and walked into the building, carrying the weight of everything he couldn't say. The meeting was about expanding into new markets, but Ethan found it hard to focus. His partners were excited about growth projections and revenue streams, but all he could think about was Naomi's face when she'd said she missed talking to him too. When he came back outside 2 hours later, she was waiting exactly where she'd said she'd be. But as he approached the car, he saw her on her phone, speaking in a voice he'd never heard before, warm, animated, full of laughter. "No, Lena, I told you, it's just a job," she was saying. "Don't read into things that aren't there." She saw him approaching and quickly ended the call. By the time he reached the car, she was back to her professional demeanor. "How was your meeting?" she asked, opening his door. "Fine. Who's Lena?" "My sister." She hesitated. "She worries about me." "What does she worry about?" Naomi met his eyes for a moment before looking away. "Getting too attached to the wrong people." The words hit him like a physical blow. As they drove through the city, Ethan found himself studying her face in the mirror, trying to read the emotions she kept so carefully controlled. She was right to keep her distance. He was engaged to another woman, and she was his employee. There was no future in whatever was growing between them, but knowing that didn't make it easier to sit in the backseat pretending he didn't care about her opinion more than anyone else's. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "Sure." "If things were different, if I weren't engaged, if you weren't working for me, would you want to get to know me better?" The question hung in the air for a long moment. Naomi kept her eyes on the road, but he could see her hands tighten on the steering wheel. "That's not a fair question," she said quietly. "Why not?" "Because things aren't different. You are engaged, and I do work for you, and asking me to imagine otherwise just makes everything harder." "I'm sorry. You're right." "Ethan." She glanced up at the mirror, and for a moment her guard dropped completely. If things were different, the answer would be yes, but they're not, and we both have to live with that. The honesty in her voice made his chest ache. They spent the rest of the drive in silence, but it felt different now. Not cold or distant, but heavy with all the things they couldn't say. When they reached his office, Naomi got out to open his door as always, but this time she looked at him directly. "I need to tell you something," she said. "I've been thinking about finding another position." The words felt like a punch to the stomach. "Why?" "Because this is getting complicated, and I don't think either of us needs that kind of complication right now." "Please don't leave. Give me one good reason why I should stay that doesn't have anything to do with how we feel about each other." He opened his mouth to answer, but no words came, because the truth was, he couldn't think of a single reason that wasn't about how much he'd grown to care about her. "That's what I thought," she said softly. "I'll finish out the week. That should give you time to find someone else." She got back in the car and drove away, leaving Ethan standing on the sidewalk feeling like his world had just shifted off its axis. In the space of 5 minutes, he'd learned that Naomi cared about him too, and that she was planning to disappear from his life forever. For the first time in his adult life, he had no idea what to do next. The thought of losing Naomi hit Ethan harder than he'd expected. He spent the entire day distracted, checking his phone for messages that didn't come and watching the clock until it was time to go home. When 5:30 arrived, he gathered his things and headed downstairs with an unfamiliar knot in his stomach. Naomi was waiting by the car as always, but she avoided his eyes as she opened the door. The drive home passed in painful silence. Every few blocks, Ethan started to say something, then stopped himself. What could he say? That he didn't want her to leave? That the thought of breaking in another driver made him feel sick? That somewhere over the past month she'd become the best part of his day? All of those things were true, but none of them changed the fundamental problem. He was engaged to Victoria, and Naomi worked for him. There was no clean way forward. When they reached his building, Naomi got out to open his door one more time. She moved efficiently, professionally, but he could see the sadness she was trying to hide. Naomi, wait. She paused, her hand on the car door handle. I don't want you to leave. I know, she said quietly, but wanting something and it being right are two different things. What if... Don't. She looked at him directly for the first time all day. Please don't make this harder than it already is. She got back in the car and drove away, leaving Ethan standing on the sidewalk feeling more alone than he'd felt in years. That evening, he had dinner with Victoria at an expensive restaurant downtown. She was excited about something, a new business opportunity, a connection her father had made. But Ethan found it hard to focus on her words. His mind kept drifting to Naomi's quiet dignity, the way she'd refused to let him make things more complicated than they already were. Are you listening to me? Victoria asked, setting down her wine glass. Sorry, long day. I was telling you about the Whitman account. My father thinks there might be an opportunity for your firm to consult on their expansion project. That's great. You don't sound excited. I'm tired. Victoria studied his face with the analytical expression he'd grown used to. Ethan, is something wrong? You've been distracted for weeks. Just work stress. We should take a vacation after the engagement party, somewhere tropical. It would be good for both of us to disconnect for a while. The engagement party. Ethan had managed to forget about it for a few hours, but Victoria's mention brought all his anxiety flooding back. 300 people celebrating a decision he was no longer sure he wanted to make. Actually, I've been thinking we should postpone the party, he said. Victoria's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Postpone it? Why? I'm not ready for something that public yet. Ethan, we've already sent the invitations. The venue is booked. The caterer is confirmed. We can't just postpone it. Why not? Because people are expecting it. My parents have invited half their social circle. Your father has been telling his business contacts about it for weeks. So we're doing this for other people? We're doing this because it's the next step in our relationship, because we're adults with responsibilities and reputations to consider. Ethan set down his napkin. What if I don't want to base my personal life on what other people expect? Then you're being naive. Victoria's voice was sharp now. Like it or not, we're public figures. Everything we do affects our professional standing. I'm not a public figure. I run a small consulting firm. A successful consulting firm that could become a major player with the right connections. Ethan, what's gotten into you? A month ago, you understood how these things work. A month ago. Before Naomi. Before morning conversations that made him feel more himself than he had in years. Before he'd started to understand the difference between being with someone and truly knowing them. Maybe I'm just tired of treating my personal life like a business deal, he said. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. Are you having second thoughts about our engagement? The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Ethan could lie, could smooth things over and buy himself more time to figure out what he wanted, or he could tell the truth and deal with the consequences. I think I need some time to figure out what I really want, he said. Victoria's face went very still. I see. Victoria? No, I understand perfectly. She signaled for the check. You need time to figure out if a successful, beautiful woman who's completely committed to building a life with you is what you want. It's not about you. You're everything anyone could want in a partner. But I don't think I'm in love with you. The words came out before he could stop them. Victoria stared at him across the table, her carefully composed expression cracking slightly. And you're just figuring this out now, after 8 months of being engaged? I think I've known for a while. I just didn't want to admit it. Victoria paid the check without looking at him. They walked to the parking garage in silence, their footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. I assume this has something to do with your new driver, she said as they reached her car. The observation surprised him. What makes you say that? The timing is interesting. You start questioning our relationship right around the time you hire her. Naomi has nothing to do with this, doesn't she? Ethan wanted to deny it, but the truth was more complicated. Naomi hadn't caused his doubts about Victoria. Those had been building for months, but she had shown him what it felt like to connect with someone on a deeper level, to have conversations that mattered, silences that felt comfortable, moments of understanding that didn't require explanation. She made me realize what I've been missing, he said finally. And what's that? Feeling excited about the person I'm with, looking forward to, seeing them, missing them when they're gone. Victoria got in her car and rolled down the window. I hope she's worth it, Ethan, because you're throwing away something real for a fantasy. She drove away, leaving him standing in the parking garage feeling like he'd just jumped off a cliff without knowing where he'd land. The next morning, Ethan woke up with a strange sense of relief. The engagement was over. Victoria had made that clear without them having to discuss the details. He felt guilty about hurting her, but underneath the guilt was something he hadn't felt in months. Freedom. He checked the time, 7:15. In 15 minutes, Naomi would be outside his building for what she'd said would be one of her last days driving him. The thought made his stomach twist. He dressed quickly and headed downstairs. Naomi was waiting by the car, wearing a burgundy blazer he'd never seen before. She looked beautiful and distant, like a painting he could admire but never touch. "Good morning," she said, opening his door. "Morning." As they pulled into traffic, Ethan tried to think of a way to tell her about Victoria, but every approach felt wrong. "Hey, I broke up with my fiancé last night because of you. Good news, I ended my engagement and now we can explore whatever this is between us." Nothing sounded right because nothing was simple. Even with Victoria out of the picture, there was still the issue of their professional relationship, still the fact that Naomi was planning to leave. "You're quiet this morning," she observed. "Rough night. Work problems? Personal problems?" She glanced at him in the rearview mirror, but didn't ask for details. They drove the rest of the way in silence, but Ethan could feel her curiosity. When they reached his office building, she got out to open his door as always. But this time, he didn't get out immediately. "Naomi, can I ask you something?" "Sure. If the situation were different, if there weren't professional complications, would you consider having dinner with me? Just to talk, away from all this?" He gestured at the car, the office building, the structured routine of their days. She was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. "Are you asking hypothetically?" "I'm asking because Victoria and I ended our engagement last night." The words hit her like a physical blow. He could see her absorb the information, process its implications, try to figure out what it meant for them. "Because of me?" she asked quietly. "Because I realized I was settling for something safe instead of looking for something real." "Ethan, I'm not asking you to date me or start a relationship or anything complicated. I'm just asking if you'd have dinner with me, as two people who enjoy talking to each other." She leaned against the car, looking suddenly tired. "Do you know what you're asking?" "I think so. You're asking me to risk my job, my professional reputation, and probably my heart for someone who just ended an 8-month engagement overnight." The bluntness of her words stung, but he couldn't argue with them. "You're right," he said. "It's not fair of me to ask." "No, it's not." She opened the door wider, waiting for him to get out. "I need to think about this." "Of course. I mean, really think about it, not just react emotionally." "I understand." He started to get out of the car, then turned back. "For what it's worth, I didn't end things with Victoria because I thought you'd say yes to dinner. I ended them because I realized I was being dishonest with both of us. Naomi nodded slowly. I'll call you tonight. The day passed with excruciating slowness. Ethan found himself checking his phone every few minutes, even though he knew Naomi wouldn't call until evening. He had 3 meetings, but his mind was elsewhere. His assistant asked if he was feeling well. His business partner suggested he take a long weekend. Everyone could tell something had changed, but no one knew what. At 6:30, his phone rang. Naomi's name appeared on the screen, and his heart started racing. Hello? It's me. I wasn't sure you'd call. I said I would. Her voice sounded tired, like she'd been wrestling with the decision all day. I talked to my sister, she continued. She thinks I'm crazy for even considering this. What do you think? I think she's probably right. A pause. But I also think I'd regret not finding out what this could be. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. So is that a yes to dinner? It's a yes to dinner, but with conditions. Whatever you need. First, I finish out the week as your driver, and then we find you someone else. I won't date someone I work for. Agreed. Second, this isn't a rebound relationship for you. If you're still processing the end of your engagement, if you're not ready for something real, tell me now. I'm ready. Are you sure? Because I don't do casual, Ethan. I don't date for fun or convenience or because I'm lonely. If we do this, I need to know you're serious about seeing where it goes. The intensity in her voice made him pause. This wasn't the careful, professional Naomi he'd gotten used to. This was someone laying her cards on the table, demanding honesty in return. I've never been more serious about anything in my life, he said. Okay then. Her voice softened slightly. Pick me up Friday at 7. And Ethan? Yeah? Don't make me regret this. After she hung up, Ethan sat in his apartment feeling like his life had just taken a sharp turn in a direction he'd never expected. 3 days ago, he'd been engaged to Victoria, settled into a routine that felt safe and predictable. Now he was single, having dinner with a woman who challenged everything he thought he knew about relationships. The smart thing would be to take it slow, to give himself time to adjust to the end of his engagement before jumping into something new. But nothing about his feelings for Naomi felt smart or safe or predictable. It felt like the first honest thing he'd done in years, and for the first time in months, he couldn't wait to see what happened next. The rest of the week crawled by with painful slowness. Ethan found himself watching the clock during meetings, distracted by thoughts of Friday evening. Naomi maintained her professional distance during their drives, but he caught her glancing at him in the rearview mirror more often than usual. On Thursday morning, she broke the comfortable silence they'd settled into. I found you a new driver, she said. Marcus Transportation Services. They're reliable, professional. I've already given them your schedule and preferences. When do they start? Monday morning. And us. We'll see how Friday goes. That evening, Ethan's father called to check in. Word had already gotten around about the broken engagement. Victoria had apparently called her parents, who'd called theirs, who'd called Henry. I hope you know what you're doing, son, Henry said without preamble. I'm figuring it out. Victoria Lang is a catch, beautiful, intelligent, from a good family. You're not going to find better. Maybe I'm not looking for better. Maybe I'm looking for different. Different how? Ethan thought about how to explain it without mentioning Naomi specifically. Someone who makes me want to be a better person. Someone I'm excited to see, not obligated to see. That's romantic nonsense, Ethan. Real relationships are built on compatibility, shared goals, mutual respect. What about love? What about it? Love is a feeling. Feelings change. Commitment is a choice you make every day regardless of how you feel. But shouldn't the choice feel right? Shouldn't there be something deeper than just deciding to stick with someone? Henry was quiet for a moment. Is there someone else? The question hung in the air. Ethan could lie, could keep things simple and avoid his father's inevitable disapproval, but he was tired of being dishonest about what mattered to him. Maybe. Who is she? Someone I care about. Someone who sees me as more than just my business success or my family name. Son, be careful. You're in a vulnerable state right now. Don't make any decisions you'll regret when the dust settles. What if this isn't about being vulnerable? What if this is about finally being honest with myself? After they hung up, Ethan sat in his kitchen thinking about his father's words. Maybe Henry was right. Maybe he was making emotional decisions that would look foolish in 6 months. But the alternative, going back to a life built entirely on other people's expectations, felt worse than any mistake he might make following his heart. Friday arrived gray and drizzly. Ethan spent the day nervous in a way he hadn't felt since college. He changed clothes 3 times, settling finally on dark jeans and a button-down shirt that felt casual but not sloppy. At 6:45, he stood outside Naomi's apartment building, holding a bouquet of simple white flowers and wondering if he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Naomi's building was in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes from downtown. Older brick construction, well-maintained but not fancy. The kind of place someone chose for character rather than prestige. She came down at exactly 7 o'clock, wearing a navy blue dress that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and she'd traded her professional blazer for a soft cardigan. She looked beautiful and nervous and completely herself. "Hi," she said, accepting the flowers with a smile that made his chest feel tight. "Hi, you look beautiful." "Thank you. Where are we going?" "I thought we'd try that little Italian place on Maple Street. Small, quiet, good food." "Sounds perfect." They walked to his car, and Ethan opened the passenger door for her. It felt strange to have her in the front seat instead of driving, like their roles had shifted in some fundamental way. "This is weird," she said, echoing his thoughts. "Good weird or bad weird?" "I'm not sure yet." The restaurant was everything Ethan had hoped, intimate without being romantic, busy enough to provide privacy but quiet enough for conversation. They were seated at a corner table with soft lighting and white tablecloths. For the first few minutes they made awkward small talk about the weather and the menu, but gradually the conversation found its natural rhythm. Without the structure of their professional relationship, they discovered new things about each other. Naomi told him about growing up in a family of teachers and mechanics, about learning to change her own oil at 12 and reading philosophy books for fun in high school. She'd wanted to be a social worker before deciding the bureaucracy would drive her crazy. She loved old movies and cooking elaborate meals for herself and taking long drives with no destination in mind. Ethan found himself talking about things he rarely shared with anyone. His anxiety about living up to his father's expectations. His fear that he'd built a successful business but forgotten how to be happy. The loneliness he'd felt even when surrounded by people who supposedly cared about him. "I think that's why I liked our morning drives so much," he said over dessert. "For 30 minutes a day I didn't have to be anyone except myself." "You were always yourself with me," Naomi said. "That's what made those conversations feel different." "Different from what?" "From most of the interactions I have. People either want something from me or they're trying to impress me. You just talked, like we were friends who happened to be in the same car." "We were friends." "Were. I don't know what we are now." Naomi smiled, the first completely relaxed expression he'd seen from her all evening. "We're 2 people having dinner and trying to figure out if there's something here worth exploring." "And what do you think so far?" "I think you're different than I expected." "How?" "More uncertain, more willing to admit when you don't have answers. I was worried you might be one of those men who thinks money and success make them experts on everything." "My father's like that. It never seemed to make him particularly happy." "What would make you happy?" It was the same question she'd asked him weeks ago, but this time he had an answer. "Feeling like my life belongs to me instead of to everyone else's expectations. Having conversations that matter, waking up excited about the day instead of obligated to get through it." "That sounds achievable." "Does it?" "Most things are achievable if you're willing to make the choices that support them instead of the choices that look good to other people." After dinner, they walked slowly back to his car. The rain had stopped, and the evening air felt fresh and clean. Ethan found himself hoping the drive to her apartment would take longer than usual. "Can I ask you something?" he said as they reached the car. "Sure." "When did you first start thinking about me as more than just your employer?" Naomi leaned against the passenger door, considering the question. "The morning you told me you weren't sure what would make a good day for you. Most people would have given me some standard answer about success and achievement, but you actually thought about it, admitted you didn't know. It made me want to know more about who you were when no one was watching. And when did you realize it was becoming a problem? The day Victoria announced your engagement party. I went home and realized I was disappointed, which scared me. I don't usually get emotionally invested in my clients. Is that why you pulled back? I was trying to protect both of us. Getting involved with someone you work for is complicated enough. Getting involved with someone who's engaged to someone else is just asking for heartbreak. They stood by the car for a moment, not quite ready to end the evening. Ethan felt like they were standing at the edge of something significant, a choice that would determine the direction of both their lives. Naomi, I need you to know something. What? I didn't break up with Victoria because I thought you'd be interested in dating me. I broke up with her because I realized I was living someone else's life instead of my own. You helped me see that, but you didn't cause it. I know, that's why I agreed to dinner. But if we do this, if we see where this goes, I need to know you're prepared for what comes next. What do you mean? Your father isn't going to approve of me. Your business associates are going to wonder why you left someone like Victoria for your driver. People are going to have opinions about our relationship, and not all of them will be kind. Ethan realized she was right. Dating Naomi meant dealing with his father's disappointment, his colleagues' judgment, the social complications of crossing class and professional boundaries. A month ago, those concerns would have stopped him cold, but standing there looking at her face in the lamplight, he found he didn't care what other people thought. Let them have opinions, he said. I'm tired of making decisions based on what other people will think. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. Naomi studied his face for a long moment, then smiled. In that case, I had a really good time tonight. Good enough for a second date? Good enough for a second date. He drove her home, feeling lighter than he had in months. As he walked her to her building entrance, she stopped and turned to face him. Thank you for dinner, and for being honest about what you want. Thank you for giving me a chance. Ethan. Yeah? Tomorrow, when your new driver picks you up, you're going to feel strange. You're going to miss our routine. Wonder if you made the right choice. That's normal. And what should I do when that happens? Remember why you made this choice. Remember what it felt like to settle for safe instead of reaching for real. She kissed his cheek softly, a gesture that felt more intimate than anything he'd shared with Victoria in months of engagement. I'll call you tomorrow, he said. I hope you do. As he drove home, Ethan thought about what his life would look like now. No more Victoria, no more engagement party, no more pretending to be excited about a future that felt like an elaborate performance. Instead, there would be uncertainty, complications, and probably some difficult conversations with his father. But there would also be Naomi. There would be honest conversations and genuine laughter and the possibility of building something real with someone who saw him clearly and chose him anyway. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like he was moving toward something instead of just going through the motions. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely worth the risk. 3 months later, Ethan stood in his kitchen making coffee for two. Outside, spring rain tapped gently against the windows and the morning light felt soft and welcoming. In a few minutes, Naomi would arrive for their usual Saturday breakfast routine, a tradition that had developed naturally over weeks of choosing each other over and over again. The conversation with his father had been as difficult as expected. Henry had expressed disappointment, concern, and predictions of regret. But gradually, as he watched Ethan become more confident and content, his resistance had softened into grudging acceptance. Victoria had taken a job in Portland, a fresh start that seemed to suit her better than their relationship ever had. She'd sent a brief but gracious note wishing them well, a gesture that had surprised and touched them both. The business associates and social connections had reacted exactly as Naomi predicted, with curiosity, judgment, and eventual indifference. Some relationships had cooled, but the ones that mattered had adapted. Most importantly, Ethan had discovered what it felt like to wake up excited about the day ahead instead of obligated to get through it. He'd learned the difference between settling for someone who looked right on paper and choosing someone who made him want to be the best version of himself. When Naomi knocked on his door, he opened it to find her smiling and shaking raindrops from her jacket. "Morning," she said, kissing him hello with an ease that still made his heart race. "Morning. Coffee's ready?" "Perfect. I brought ingredients for those blueberry pancakes you liked." As they moved around his kitchen together, comfortable in the rhythm they'd built over weeks of shared mornings, Ethan reflected on how dramatically his life had changed. 6 months ago, he'd been engaged to a woman he respected but didn't love, living a life that met everyone's expectations except his own. Now, he was with someone who challenged him, supported him, and made ordinary moments feel significant. Someone who'd taught him the difference between being safe and being happy. "What are you thinking about?" Naomi asked, noticing his expression as she mixed batter. "Just how different everything is now." "Good different. The best different." She smiled and went back to cooking, and Ethan watched her move around his kitchen like she belonged there. Which, he realized, she did. Not because they'd made any formal commitments or official declarations, but because they'd chosen each other honestly and continued choosing each other every day. Outside, the rain continued its gentle percussion against the windows. Inside, they built their Saturday morning together, pancakes and coffee and easy conversation and the quiet joy of being exactly where they were supposed to be. It wasn't the life Ethan had planned, but it was the life he'd chosen. And for the first time in years, that felt like exactly the right thing. Later that evening, as they walked through the neighborhood after dinner, Naomi slipped her hand into his. "I'm proud of you," she said. "For what?" "For having the courage to choose what you wanted instead of what was expected." "It wasn't courage, it was you." "No," she said, squeezing his hand. "It was you finally trusting yourself enough to listen to your heart." As they walked home together through the quiet streets, Ethan realized she was right. Falling in love with Naomi hadn't been about finding someone to complete him or fix his problems. It had been about finding someone who helped him become brave enough to live his own life. And that, he thought as she laughed at something he said, and the evening light caught the warmth in her eyes, was the best kind of love there was. Not the kind that rescued you from yourself, but the kind that helped you become who you were always meant to be. The kind that was worth every risk, every difficult conversation, every moment of uncertainty. The kind that felt like coming home.